What would you do if the father who abandoned you years ago suddenly showed up, asking for a second chance? This is a story of forgiveness, redemption, and the power of healing. A reunion you won't forget. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Ethan sat by the window of his modest apartment, watching raindrops slide down the glass like tiny rivers racing to nowhere. The gentle patter of rain was the only sound in the room. A steaming mug of coffee sat untouched on the table beside him, its warmth long gone. Life had taught Ethan that some wounds never fully heal. They just become easier to live with. Growing up without a father had been one of those wounds. His dad had walked out when he was 10. No explanations, no promises to keep in touch, just the echo of the door slamming shut and the crushing realization that he wasn't coming back. Ethan's mother had done everything she could to fill the void, working double shifts and sacrificing her own happiness to make sure he had what he needed. But no matter how hard she tried, there were things she simply couldn't replace. School events where other kids had their dads cheering them on, weekends spent fixing bikes or learning how to throw a football. Those were gaps that stayed empty. By the time he hit his teenage years, Ethan had built walls around his heart. Trust was a fragile thing, and he wasn't willing to hand it out easily. Life had taught him one simple rule: people leave, and it's best not to expect otherwise. Now in his late 20s, Ethan had a good job, loyal friends, and a life he had built brick by brick with his own determination. On the surface, he seemed fine, but in the quiet moments, like this rainy Sunday afternoon, the ache of abandonment still lingered. The vibration of his phone pulled him from his thoughts. He reached for it, expecting a message from a friend or a work email. Instead, his heart skipped a beat as he read the words on the screen. "Ethan, this is your father. I know I have no right to ask, but could we meet?" The world seemed to blur around him. He read the message again, disbelief and confusion swirling in his chest. His father? After all these years? Anger bubbled up first. How dare he? What gave him the right to waltz back into Ethan's life after disappearing without a trace? But beneath the anger was something Ethan hated to admit. A flicker of curiosity, maybe even hope. He stared at the message, torn between the urge to delete it and the nagging question he had carried for years. Why did you leave? His thumb hovered over the screen before he typed a single, hesitant reply. Where and when? 2 days later, Ethan found himself sitting in a small coffee shop on the edge of town. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but his stomach was in knots. He tapped his foot nervously under the table, glancing toward the door every few seconds. Part of him wanted to run, to leave before his father showed up and reopened old wounds. But a stronger part of him needed answers, closure, maybe even the chance to heal. The bell above the door jingled, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat as a familiar, yet older face walked in. His father, grayer, thinner, but unmistakably the man who had haunted Ethan's memories, stood there, searching the room until their eyes met. Ethan's pulse quickened as years of pain, resentment, and longing collided inside him. This was it, the moment he never thought would come. Ethan's heart raced as his father walked toward the table, each step seeming to stretch time. The man who had vanished from his childhood now stood right in front of him, aged but recognizable. Lines creased his weathered face, and his eyes carried a weight that spoke of regret. "Ethan," his father said softly, his voice cracking with emotion. "Dad," Ethan responded stiffly, the word tasting strange on his tongue. There was an awkward silence as his father sat across from him, folding his hands nervously on the table. The hum of conversations and clinking coffee cups filled the space between them. "I didn't think you'd come," his father admitted, glancing down. "Neither did I," Ethan said bluntly. His father nodded, accepting the bitterness without flinching. "I don't deserve your time, but I needed to see you, to explain." Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. "Why now? After all these years?" His father took a shaky breath. "I was a coward, Ethan. I made mistakes that I thought I couldn't fix, so I ran. And every day since, I've regretted it. Ethan felt a surge of anger rising in his chest. You think that makes it better? That knowing you regretted it somehow fixes what you did to Mom and me? No, his father said quietly, his voice heavy with guilt. It doesn't. But I'm here now, hoping, praying, that I can at least try to make things right. Ethan's jaw clenched. Memories flooded back. Nights when his mother cried herself to sleep, birthdays where he blew out candles wishing his dad would walk through the door, only to be disappointed every time. You missed everything, Ethan said, his voice raw. Graduations, holidays, the nights I needed you. Mom worked herself to the bone because you left, and now you think showing up out of nowhere will change that. Tears welled up in his father's eyes, but he didn't look away. You have every right to hate me, but I need you to know that leaving was never about not loving you. I was young, scared, and stupid. I thought you'd be better off without me. Ethan shook his head, disbelief mingling with sorrow. We weren't better off without you. We just learned how to survive without you. The words hung in the air, heavy with years of pain. Ethan expected his father to get defensive, to make excuses, but instead, he nodded solemnly. I know, his father whispered, and I can't change the past. But if there's even a sliver of a chance, I want to be in your life now. Even if it's just as a friend, or someone you call when you need help moving furniture. Ethan let out a bitter laugh despite himself. Moving furniture? I'm serious, his father said with a faint smile. I'll take whatever you're willing to give, even if it's nothing. Ethan looked down at his coffee, his thoughts swirling. Forgiveness wasn't easy. It wasn't something that happened in an instant. But sitting here, facing the man who had been a ghost in his life for so long, Ethan realized something. Holding on to the anger had only hurt himself. I'm not saying I forgive you, Ethan said slowly. But I'm willing to hear you out. That's all I can promise right now. A wave of relief washed over his father's face. That's more than I deserve. Thank you, Ethan. The bell above the door jingled again as a group of customers entered, laughter filling the room. Life continued around them. But for Ethan, something had shifted. A burden slightly lifted, a door cracked open just enough to let in the possibility of healing. Let's start with coffee, Ethan said, gesturing to the menu. And maybe after that we'll see. His father's smile was small but genuine. Coffee sounds good. As they sipped their coffee, conversation flowed cautiously at first, like two strangers learning each other's rhythms. Ethan asked about the years his father had been gone, not out of curiosity, but to fill the gaps left by his disappearance. His father spoke honestly, without sugarcoating the past. After I left, I bounced from job to job. Thought I'd make enough to come back and set things right. But life doesn't work that way. One bad decision led to another. And before I knew it, years had slipped by. Why didn't you call? Ethan asked, his voice sharp. Mom changed her number, but there were other ways to find us. His father looked down at his cup. Shame kept me from picking up the phone. I told myself you'd moved on, that you'd hate me anyway. It was easier to stay away than face the mess I made. Ethan's chest tightened. Easier for you, maybe. Not for us. I know, his father admitted. And I live with that regret every day. I never expected you to meet me today, and I wouldn't blame you if you walked out right now. Ethan looked at the man sitting across from him, a man who seemed older than his years, weighed down by guilt and loneliness. For so long, Ethan had imagined this moment, thinking he'd feel triumphant, vindicated by his father's remorse. But now that it was here, all he felt was exhausted. Forgiveness was a concept Ethan had wrestled with for years. His anger had been a shield, protecting him from the pain of abandonment. But carrying that weight had come at a cost, missed opportunities for happiness and peace. You know, Ethan said slowly, I used to wish I'd see you walking down the street one day, that you'd tell me there was some huge reason you left, something that would make it all make sense. His father looked at him with sorrowful eyes. And now I just wish it hadn't happened at all, Ethan admitted. But it did, and I can't change that. Neither can you. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past settling between them. Finally, Ethan spoke again. But maybe we can figure out where to go from here. His father's breath hitched. You want that? I don't know, Ethan said honestly. But I'm willing to try. And that's more than I thought I'd ever say. His father nodded, his voice thick with emotion. That's all I could ever hope for. As they finished their coffee, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected. Relief. Not complete healing, not yet, but the first step toward it. His father hesitated before speaking again. I kept track of you whenever I could. I saw the man you became. And I couldn't be prouder, Ethan. Ethan's throat tightened, but he managed a faint smile. Thanks, but I got there because of Mom. His father's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I know. She's a remarkable woman. Ethan stood, signaling that it was time to leave. His father rose with him, a tentative hope in his expression. As they walked toward the door, Ethan glanced over. Hey, maybe next time you can come by and meet my dog. He's not great with strangers, but he warms up after a while. His father's face lit up. I'd like that. They stepped out into the cool afternoon air, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was breathing a little easier. The streets were quiet as they walked together, the sounds of distant traffic and birdsong filling the gaps in their conversation. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and fresh. Ethan and his father walked side by side without speaking for a while. There was no need to rush. Some things couldn't be repaired overnight. At the corner of the street, they paused. Ethan's car was parked nearby, and his father had walked to the coffee shop from his small rental on the other side of town. So, Ethan said, stuffing his hands into his pockets, "This is a start, I guess." His father nodded, his face both hopeful and uncertain. "It means more to me than you'll ever know." Ethan studied the man before him, the same one who had once been a blurry figure in old family photos, now standing here, weathered by time and mistakes. He wasn't perfect. He never had been. But maybe perfection wasn't what mattered right now. Look, Ethan said, breaking the silence. I'm not promising anything big, but if you're serious about sticking around this time, I'll give it a shot. His father's lips trembled slightly as he held back emotion. You have my word. I'll be here for as long as you'll have me. Ethan gave a small nod. Good. Just don't mess it up again. A chuckle escaped his father, lightening the tension between them. Fair enough. They stood there for a moment, neither wanting to be the first to leave. Finally, Ethan extended his hand. His father hesitated for only a second before clasping it firmly. It wasn't a magical fix. It didn't erase the years of hurt. But it was a bridge, a fragile one, perhaps, but a bridge nonetheless. I'll see you soon, Ethan said. I'm looking forward to it, his father replied, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. As Ethan walked back to his car, he felt a weight lift from his chest. Life was messy, complicated, and filled with unexpected turns. But sometimes, even in the chaos, there was room for second chances. He wasn't sure where this road would lead, but for the first time in years, he was willing to find out. Life has a way of presenting us with unexpected moments, moments that challenge us to let go of anger and open our hearts to the possibility of healing. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the past, nor does it excuse the hurt, but it frees us from the chains of bitterness and allows us to move forward. Ethan's story reminds us that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is take the first step toward reconciliation, even when it's hard. If this story moved you, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the Brotherhood Tales for more powerful stories about resilience, growth, and the lessons that shape us as men. See you next time.